Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And let's basically begin. Where we left off is that David HaMelech is running away from Avshalom, who has taken over. Avshalom has the palace, and David has fled. He has left behind 10 concubines to keep an eye on the palace, but the rest of them are fled, and they're fleeing toward the Jordan River on the east, and even to cross the Jordan River to get away and to save their lives. He's gone together with Yoav ben Tzruya, his commander-in-chief of his army, his chief of staff. He's left behind his former chief of staff, who also was with him, Amasa, his nephew. And Amasa stays behind with Avshalom. Amasa will be the chief of staff for Avshalom. So you've got that set up. David has a very wise man, Hushai, but he's elderly, he's too weak to fight, but he's wise. An even greater, wiser man, Achitophel, of Gilo, already has turned and gone to the Avshalom rebellion and is giving Avshalom advice. And he is the wisest of men. David sends Hushai, his elderly, feeble in physical capacity, advisor, to work his way over to Avshalom's camp for the purpose, number one, of spying, and, and number two, to be present at strategy meetings where Achitophel, the wise man, offers wise strategic advice. So Hushai is there to offer contrary advice and hopefully to convince Avshalom to take the contrary advice that will help David. There are two Kohanim Gedolim. There are two high Kohens at that moment in time. There's Evyatar, and Evyatar comes down the family line from Eli the Kohen we met in the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah, who's in Shiloh, and meets Hannah, who's crying at the wall, begging God for a child. That child eventually becomes Shmuel. Hannah eventually gives that child for Eli to raise. But his own two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, the text of the Tanakh tells us they did not meet the grade. And because of that, God punishes Eli the Kohen, we learned, so that somewhere down his lineage, the Kahuna Gedola, the high Kohen position, will be taken from his family line and given over to the family line of Pinchas. So there are two Kohanim Gedolim at that time, Sadok, and he will continue, and his line will continue, and Evyatar, who meanwhile also is Kohen Gadol. So you got two of them. But he's going to be on the way out. Eventually, in a later part of the book, there's going to be yet another rebellion by Adoniyahu, another son of David, and Evyatar will go to Adoniyahu. Now, the Adoniyahu rebellion will not be against David. That will never happen again, another son rebelling against David. But when David's on his deathbed, and everyone's talking about who's next king, while David is contemplating Shlomo, Solomon for the next, Adoniyahu will try to jump in first, and Evyatar will go with him. And since that rebellion will fail, that will mark the end of Evyatar, at that point being High Kohen. And Sadok will continue. But right now there are two of them. But where we left off last week is that Evyatar, who came to the camp with the Kohen's breastplate, the ephod, and it has those 12 jewels representing the 12 tribes. It's got that little parchment of the Urim and Thummim. And Evyatar consults the Urim and Thummim and gets no answer. And that reflects Kohen Gadol asking of God through the Urim and Thummim always gets an answer. And as we left off last week, not having gotten an answer when he asked of the Urim and Thummim reflected that he was being removed from his post as Kohen Gadol by God, which meant Sadok is next. And David understood that. So Evyatar continues as a kind of vice Kohen Gadol, so to speak. But there are two of them. And they have two sons. Each has a son. Achimaatz and Yonatan. And the two Kohen Gadols, and the two sons, Kohanim Gadolim, and the two sons, David sends all four of them also into the Avshalom camp to be spies. Tell Avshalom you're with him. Avshalom is only too happy to have all this sage advice. He's got Achitophel, the most sage-like person. Plus he's got both Kohen Gadols, Kohanim Gadolim, Sadok and Evyatar, and their sons. So he's got the brain power and the strategists. And he seems to have the majority of the people. David has had to run off with whatever complement of people he could. But Avshalom has the nation. So it does not look good for David. And that's where things stand right now as we resume. One more thing that came up right before we broke last week, Tziva, reminding ourselves, Yonatan died, was a lifelong, perpetual, eternal friend of David. And they swore to each other that whichever of them would outlast the other would always watch out for the friend's children, take good care of them. So David was committed to Yonatan's family to watch over them. And indeed he did. Yonatan left behind a son, Mephibosheth, who was lame for life. We've talked about that before. So he could not get anywhere. And they did not have some of the options that we have in the modern era. I'm sure they had equivalent of a wheelchair, but he would require someone to wheel him. And that was Tziva. Tziva was the guy, the majordomo. David put him in charge. He already had been in charge, and David confirmed that he will remain in charge of the estate, the grand estates that Mephibosheth inherited as the son of Jonathan, the grandson, effectively, of King Saul. Right? King Saul has Jonathan as one of his sons, and Mephibosheth is a son of Jonathan, makes him a grandson of King Saul. So he inherited a lot of property and everything like that. So, but he's lame and unable to care for it, all the more so in those days. Tziva had 15 children, sons, and they had their own people under him, but these were massive amount of estates. Think of like the king or queen of England. Like they had a lot of stuff, a lot of wealth, plenty to support 35 people in multiples. So Tziva had been taking care of Mephibosheth, and once daily Mephibosheth would be brought to King David and sit at the royal table, like at lunchtime. Another opinion that Mephibosheth ate at home and then came for like a royal dessert, where there would be a gathering late afternoon, mid-afternoon, like the equivalent of what the British call high tea, where they gather just the tea. And like the British, and these little square nothing sandwiches, there's like a slice of cucumber between two little pieces of white bread. And they eat that and crumpets or whatever they have. So the king of Israel had a royal, something like a high tea, and Mephibosheth always was there. Anyway, now he's running away trying to stay alive. And Tziva comes to show up with all kinds of foods, dry foods, sun-dried foods, which are appropriate for the situation. Raisins and figs, dried figs, they'll do better in that climate under that circumstance. And he shows up and tells David, I'm here. I've always been with you. As Mephibosheth's majordomo, my heart's always been with you. And Mephibosheth has not come because he's a traitor. And he's actually rooting for your son, Avshalom. His opinion and strategy is, Avshalom is going to beat you and kill you. And then he believes, after the rebellion succeeds, the people of Israel will look back soon, not centuries later, but they will look back promptly and will realize that Avshalom committed a mortal sin in rebelling against his father and killing David. And they will execute Avshalom sooner or later. This is Mephibosheth's strategy according to Tziva. And when they execute, Avshalom will kill you. And then when the people kill Avshalom for having been a traitor to you, Mephibosheth is thinking he'll become king again. For the first time even, he'll become king. And also the people will prefer quiet, calm. There's a lot of drama. This is like there's a complex strategy, but there's some sense to it. That the David kingship, there's a lot of drama. Not just good drama like killing Goliath, but just drama. Whatever went on between the king and this woman Bathsheba, and this guy Uriah the Hittite who was killed. And I don't know all the details people will feel, and then his son raped his daughter, and another son killed the one who raped. And then there's a rebellion. Too much drama. Need a quiet family. Just need a quiet king. We need like a Queen Elizabeth. Because it's like the king or the queen is the head of state, more than the head of government, head of state. And people look for stability. And they don't like drama. And so, look, they can't do anything about it. If your king of England is Henry VIII, and every couple of months he's beheading another wife, it is what it is. You don't speak up. But people like stability. They like things to calm down. And this is part of Mephibosheth's theory. According to Tziva, the only thing is, for all we know, this is very important, Tziva may be a liar. He may have strategized himself that Mephibosheth cannot get anywhere. He's lame, and he's isolated in the palace, his palace. So I can come here with my 15 sons and all the property and tell the story. He doesn't know what's going on. He's sitting in the palace thinking that I, Tziva, his majordomo who cares for him, is now going to David and putting him in a good light. That Mephibosheth wanted to be here, but he's not able to. Mephibosheth, innocent, thankful to David for constantly having him at the royal table for the high tea or whatever, and loyal to David, has no idea what's being said behind his back. So we don't know what's going on with that, neither does David. And that's not the only thing on his mind. More important to him right now than Tziva and Mephibosheth is staying alive. So that's where we left off. Okay. Chapter 16. David had passed a little beyond the summit when Tziva, the servant of Mephibosheth, came toward him with a pair of saddled donkeys, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisin, 100 cakes of figs, and a jar of wine, Navel Yayin. I don't know if it, I mean, my thought was, if there's not millions of people or thousands, I don't think, but there's a lot of people for 200 loaves of bread and raising one jar of wine. Regardless, maybe the jar of wine is simply not for people to all have wine, but for the king to have access to wine. Bottle of Mogan David. So anyway, if you remember, that used to be a company, a kosher wine company, in the old days before Baron Herzog and all the and everybody brought dry wines to the kosher market. So anyway, he brings all this. The king said to Tziva, "What are you doing with this? Mo elelach?" And Tziva says, "The donkeys are for your majesty's family to ride on. Hachamorim levet melech lirkov ulehilachem." Oh, let me remind you, in the Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, in the Torah, if there's any word where there's a question about how it's spelled, there is one official Masorah, tradition of how it's spelled, and that must be the way it is spelled. And if someone's reading the Torah, the Bal Kriya in Shul, and something looks wrong or even a letter is cracked, they set aside the Torah, close it up, put it away. No more bracha may be recited on it for Aliyah. And afterwards, they bring the Torah to a sofer, a scribe. Mr. Scribe, Reb Sofer, this particular letter, we don't know what to do with, or it's missing, broken. Sofer fixes it, bring it back. But you cannot use a Torah. You could use a chumash. It's not a holy book. Okay, you kiss it if it falls, but it's not a Torah. But a Torah, you may not use it if it's got even one letter cracked, incomplete. But in the Navi, there are typos. Technically, it's not a typo because the word typo comes from the word typing, and a keyboard obviously was manuscripts. But the equivalent of typos, they called them Scrivener's errors. And there were Scrivener's errors. People would have to hand copy an entire Tanakh. All 24 books, or the 19 beyond the Chumash of the Bible. And yeah, there'd be typos, namely Scrivener's errors, and incorrectly passed on word. Most of them would be caught. Somehow certain Scrivener's errors, they made it through and became part of the tradition that we have 2 spellings. Sometimes we're not sure which is the original, so we preserve both. Unlike Torah, where as soon as there's 2 spellings, they get to the bottom of it. With Navi, they don't always get to the bottom of it, and by now it's too late to get to the bottom of it. Usually, these are referred to in the text as the Kri and the Ktiv. One is the way it's written, and one is the way it's read, like in Shul when the Haftarah is read. This is, normally I don't talk about it. Normally they mean the same thing. The 2 words that have different spelling, because they're usually the same word, and one has a complete vav for the sound O. One has a vav, and one has a simple dot for the O. Or the same thing for the U. One has the vav with the dot on the side for an U, and the other has the 3 descending angled dots, the kubuts and the shuruk. So here is a case where they're spelled similarly, but have totally different meaning. Lehilachem is to go to war, to fight. From the word milchama, lachem. Lochem is a fighter. Milchama is a fight, a war. Lehilachem is to fight. Same letters, hey lamed, chet mem, sofit. Hey lamed, chet mem, sofit, with different vowels or dots. Halechem, the bread. And it could mean either here. So anyway, let's see what it says. Vayomer Tziva hachamorim levet melech hamelech lirkov ulihilachim. The one way to read it is, the donkeys that I brought are for the house of the king here to ride and fight with, to be part of your battle. They didn't have tanks in those days, so they fought on horseback, and they didn't have enough horses for everyone. And maybe the idea is the donkeys are also for fighting, for battle. The other way to read it, Vayomer Tziva hachamorim levet hamelech lirkov, the donkeys are for the house of the king for riding, nothing to do with war. V'halechem v'kayetz lechol hanam, and I've brought bread and figs and the other stuff, raisins, for everybody to eat. V'yayin lishtot haya'ef bamidbar, and those who are ya'ef, exhausted, that for them I brought wine. I always wonder, I don't have an answer for this. I've always wondered, in the Bible, they always talk about that someone was thirsty and they brought wine for him. Well, here, I brought wine for those that are weak and tired. I don't know. I'm not a drinker, never really been much of a drinker, but I'm not a teetotaler, however that's pronounced either. I drink wine until I went on to certain medicines for which I'm no longer allowed to have alcohol. But I would drink wine at Shabbat, a couple of glasses. I didn't completely hold back, but I was never a drinker who would lose my complete sobriety and everything. I could always recite the alphabet backwards while walking a straight line. But I've always thought, like wine, you're giving it to someone who's tired, who's exhausted. That's going to make him less exhausted. Or he's thirsty, so you're thirsty, you have water. You drink wine when you're thirsty. So I've never gotten, but anyway, he explains that's why I brought this. You're in the desert now, and the wine is to be drunk by any who are exhausted in the wilderness. All right, whatever. So I brought wine, and I brought the food. That's what this is. And David says, great, and where's Mephibosheth? I mean, if I see you, I expect to see him. Ayeh ben Adonecha, where is the son of your master? Because the actual master at Tziva was Jonathan, and Mephibosheth inherits Tziva. Oh, he's staying in Jerusalem. He thinks the house of Israel will now give him back the throne of his grandfather, Yashivalo Bet Yisrael et Mamlechut Avi. But I just explained. Wow. So the king said to Tziva, then all that belongs to him is now yours. Okay? Let him deal with that. I'm not going to kill him. I'm just going to take from him everything he had. You can have it all. And Tziva replied, I bow low. No, indeed, quite low. Actually, in English, in Hebrew, it doesn't use the word low. Hishtachaveti, I prostrate. It's different from lichroa lamata, as opposed to loredet. Hishtachaveti is I prostrate. Emsachen beinecha adoni hamelech, may I find favor in your eyes. Okay, so that's the story of it. It's going to just file that in the back of your mind, because that chapter is not over. There is yet more to be reckoned in the matter of David, Tziva, and Mephibosheth. But as of right now, David is taking all of Mephibosheth's property, and by royal decree, granting it all to Tziva and his descendants. Okay, next story. Well, let's look at commentary for a moment. See what we have so far, if I have. Okay. U'Mephibosheth yoshev Yerushalayim. So this is the Malbim on what I just learned with you. Ratzah lomar lo halach v'lo lahakbil pnei Avshalom. In other words, David, that Avshalom is sitting in Jerusalem. Mephibosheth is sitting in Jerusalem. He has not gone to David, and he has not gone to Absalom. He's sitting it out right now. real politician. He's going to wait and see who rises. Ratzal lo halach lo lahakbil pnei Avshalom. Tziva is conveying he's Yoshev. He is sitting. He's just sitting still. He has not gone to receive the face of Avshalom. V'lo levrach im David. And likewise, he has not fled with David, which, by the way, makes perfect sense. He's lame. He can't do the run. He can't march. But Tziva is saying, Ki choshev she'achar she'harog Avshalom et aviv. Tziva is saying that Mephibosheth thinks, after Avshalom kills his father, Yedinohu Yisrael keven sorah umoreh. The people of Israel put Avshalom on trial according to the Torah law of ben sorah umoreh, a rebellious son who gets executed. V'tashuva malchut levet Shaul, and by default the throne will revert back to the house of Saul. V'hinei lo haya lo David lekabel divrei ha'eved. And the Malbim adds, David should not have believed the words of the slave Tziva. He had no business believing Tziva, and clearly he does, because he says, well, in that case, all of Mephibosheth's property is now by royal decree transferred over to you. And the Malbim says, for having wrongly judged against Mephibosheth without having heard his side of the story, David was punished immediately by the emergence of Shimi ben Gera. We're going to learn about him in a moment, who comes out to curse him and bring shame to him. So David will experience great shame immediately because he bought into that. In the same way, and Radak is commenting separately about the donkeys. So what's the deal with the donkeys? We said either they're to help with the war, or they're just there for riding, not like sport, but to travel, like a wagon. Or they didn't have cars, and if there was a shortage of horses, so here's some donkeys, particularly for people that can't ride a horse. Horses go faster. Radak explains, Levit Melchikov, Linshe HaMelech. Remember, Radak says that David brought a lot of women with him. He brought his entire everybody in the house, everybody in the palace, his entire staff, all the workers, his servants and attendants, people who stood with him. And he brought all his women. Kilo hiniach achat minashav. He did not leave behind any of his wives, only 10 of his concubines. Ela eser pilagshim lishmor habayit. So it says he left behind pilagshim, concubines, but not nashim, wives. We know he had at least 6 or 7 wives. From that one set of Pesukim that listed 6 wives. And there's an opinion that one of those 6 wives, Eglah, was Michal. And another opinion that they're separate. So it's either 6 or 7 wives. And then we learn later that when Natan was, and we know Bathsheba later will come in the picture. That could be like an 8th wife. And Natan the prophet makes a comment for which we learned a long time ago that it's inferred in the Gemara that David had between 12, 18, and 24 wives. There was something where Natan had told him a parable, was trying to explain to him that he's going to be punished gravely by God for the sin of Bathsheba and Uriah. And Natan had told him that story about the rich man coming through and he wanted meat, and the guy, the whole story. And David had said, for a rich man to steal a poor man's only sheep when he's got so many, he should die. And then Natan said, well, look at what you've done. And look how God has given you so many wives already. And it said in the text, he's given you wives, and kahena and kahena. And the word kahena means and like them. And the Gemara explained, we learned all this, that we know that David had at least 6 wives. And Natan said, and you have kahena, means like them, implying he had 6 more wives. V'chahena, says it twice, implying he had 6 more wives, 18 wives. And then the Gemara also says, another opinion, he has 6 wives, v'chahena, and 6 more like them, is 12. V'chahena, and like them, not like 6, but like 12, which brings you to 24. So all we know is that a king can have 18 to 24 wives. There's another opinion, 36. Let's even say 18. So he brought a certain number of women. He left behind 10 pilakshim. Who knows how many concubines he had. It was a wealthy palace, and there clearly were a lot of kids. So anyway, the Radak is saying that Tziva brought donkeys for the many women, so they would not have to continue trekking by foot the long journey and retreat from Avshalom. Linshei HaMelech, that Leveit HaMelech Lekov Linshei HaMelech, that Tziva brought the donkeys for the wives of the king, Ki lo hiniach achat min hashav ela eser pilakshim lishmor habayit, because David did not leave behind any of the wives, only the 10 concubines to watch the palace. V'lo lakchu b'tzetam markavot lanashim, and they did not bring at the time chariots or other means of riding, R-I-D-I-N-G, when they left. Ki b'chipazon yatzeu, because they left in great haste. You may recognize that expression, b'chipazon yatzeu. That's like the way the Jews got out of Egypt on the night of the 10th plague. And the next day, when we got out, the Paro wanted us out right away, and we left b'chipazon, in great haste. Then in Egypt, we didn't have time to bake bread. And here, there was no time to line up transport. The text says that they had to race. So that is what happened. And that's why it's bringing donkeys, in addition to others. And third and final commentary for this spot is another Malbim. Actually, it's the same one. And I guess I popped it up twice. Okay, back to the text. So David has just decided all of Mephibosheth's property is going to transfer over to Tziva and his group. And now David continues. And Malbim says that David immediately will be punished by God with some kind of punishment. And a punishment that will not necessarily reflect the sin of having given everything to Tziva and having believed the worst of Mephibosheth, but a punishment nonetheless. Uva HaMelech David ad Bachurim. There's a place called Bachurim. And David finally reaches there on the way out of the country. V'nei misham ish yotzeh mimishpachat bet Shaul u'shmo Shimi ben Gera. And as he hits Bachurim, and he's basically surrounded by his retinue, by David's own retinue of all the people who fled the palace, minus the 10 concubines. And suddenly a guy shows up. He's not from their side. He hates them. Ish yotzei mishpachat bet Shaul, a man who emerges from the family of Saul, not Saul's son or uncle or niece, or brother, but someone from the greater Saul family, ushmo Shimi ben Gera. That's his name, Shimi the son of Gera. Has nothing to do with Ger. It's just the name is Gera, I don't know. Yotzei yatso umik halel, and he's there, and he's practically frothing at the mouth, cursing David. Now understand, as you of course do, that the word curse itself is different in those days. Even cursing was clean-lipped. People did not use filthy language. The Torah is holy, gentle language. And because the language of the Torah and Tanakh is so pure and refined, once you get into that mode of reading and of understanding, once you get into the mode, you really, it's kind of interesting that when people do not talk in coarse language, it takes a lot less to speak the language and convey a curse, an insult, a word that people are shocked to hear spoken by such a person, because no one has raised the bar. So people like, how many times have you heard some, normally not a Jew, not an Orthodox Jew, but like a religious devout Christian might say something like, you should go to HE double hockey sticks. And the first time I ever heard that, like HE double hockey sticks, and I had to picture it in my mind. Two upright letters, HE. They wouldn't say the word hell, because it's such a filthy word. The society would not say that word. How they named a city in Michigan by that name, as they say only in America. But you wouldn't say that. So many words. The word damn, D-A-M-N. I remember as a boy on the camp bus, I went to day camp. We couldn't afford sleepaway camp, and Uncle David, Zichrono Livracha, gave my mom the money to pay tuition so we all could go to highlight day camp. Or we wouldn't have been able to go to day camp either. So we'd be every day on the day camp bus from Brooklyn to Queens, Far Rockaway, highlight day camp. And they would sing camp songs. And one of the songs was, there were three jolly fishermen. Fisher, fisher, men, men, men. Fisher, fisher, men, men, men. There were three jolly fishermen. And you had, first one name was Abraham. And then Isaac, Isaac. And the third one was Jacob. And then came the part, they all went down to Amster. They all went down to Amster. Amster. Went down to Amster. You mustn't say that dirty word. You mustn't say that dirty word. Dirty word. Dirty word. Mustn't say that dirty word. I'm gonna say it anyhow. I'm gonna say it anyhow. How. How. Gonna say it anyhow. They all went down to Amster, and then you'd scream out the bus, damn! They all went down to Amster, damn! Amster, damn! And that's what it was like when I was a boy in the 1960s. And God knows in the 1920s, people had a holier language. They were careful how they spoke. America now, it's really a shame and a shame, a busha. It's a disgrace. And even on regular television, it started with cable TV because that had fewer restrictions than commercial TV. And now it's hefker on it's chaos on YouTube and everything. I just read yesterday, there's a publication, an outlet called The Free Press. It's Barry Weiss's thing. And she created it about a year or two ago. It's called The Free Press. And they ran an article by David Mamet. He's the famous playwright, American Buffalo, Glengarry, Glen Ross. And the article was about the word F-U, and his point was, when I wrote American Buffalo and Glengarry, Glen Ross, I threw the word in one time in each play as a shock. And I don't know what word is left in the English language to shock anymore. He wrote, there's nothing left as someone whose profession and lifetime has been spent wielding the English language for its nuances. I don't know what's left to convey shock. Everything is out there. None of it conveys shock. The only thing left is to tell someone, I'm going to F your effing da-da-da-da-da. He says, and if you want to convey shock, you add the words, and I really mean it. That's what's happened to English. So here is Shimi ben Gera cursing David. So what does it mean? He's not yelling today's coarse words. He's instead putting an imprecation, a kind of like, woo on him, and saying to him, you got what you deserved. There's David in defeat, fleeing from Yerushalayim. God knows where. He does not yet have a decided upon destination. He's just running. He's just getting out of Dodge. And he's surrounded by his people. And his own son is trying to kill him. And the last thing he needs now is some guy taunting him from across the street yelling, you deserve everything you got. You're a murderer. You brought blood into Jerusalem. You have shed blood. You're a lowlife. And nobody talks to a king like that. You have to be careful when you talk to a king, even if you want to insult a king. One just has to watch, and I like Trump. You know I like Trump. But you watch how they talk to Trump, his advisors, how careful they are when they talk to Trump, playing to his ego. His ego is, the size of Earth. And again, I like him. I like most of his policies. But what's true is true. You listen to any of his advisors at a press conference. It could be Vance. It could be Bondi. It could be Hegseth, whoever it is. His ambassadors, how carefully they talk about him to his ego. And it gives you a flavor. And I don't buy into this leftist stuff that he's anti-democratic and a tyrant, but it gives you a flavor of how during the Tanakh, how people had to talk in the presence of the king. And even now, you have to be careful how you talk to a king. Okay, today's king in England is like a nobody. You treat him with respect, you're careful, but King Charles, he can't execute anybody. He doesn't have that kind of authority. He just has tea and crumpets. But still, you talk nicely. So that's to understand who Shimi ben Gera is. This is shocking. The words that he's yelling are shocking. And that's why I've gone off on this explanation, because people do not talk that way, particularly to the father, the progenitor of Mashiach. So you have Shimi ben Gera. Yotze Makalel. And he comes cursing. What's the Vayisakel? Ba'avanim et David. He starts throwing stones. What a chutzpah. And by the way, you can kill somebody. I mean, sticks and stones can break your bones. And that's when they would execute someone with stoning, that's skila. It's serious stuff. It doesn't say, let's say, vayashlech ba'avanim, and he hurled or he threw stones. He stoned him. He's really throwing big rocks, big broken stones. Viet kol avdei melech David. And he's He's like a wild man, this Shimi ben Gera. He's throwing it at David. It's shocking that he has such confidence that he's not going to get himself killed right now. He's so persuaded that they're running for their lives that they will not deviate even for a moment to deal with him. He's throwing the rocks. And this is kind of quote how Shimi was cursing. Get out, get out. Say, ish hadamim. You, the man of blood. If it were criminal, it would be ish palilim. It's the wrong translation. You man of blood. The ish habliyal, you man of no values. So the commentators talk about it. What does that mean? Man of blood, man of no values. A number of people have died because of David, even though David had nothing to do with it, inadvertently. It wasn't he, it was like Yoav. So, for example, when David had the opportunity to unite the kingdom, the chief of staff of the military for Ishbosheth, the son of Shaul, not Mephibosheth, not the lame one, but the son of Shaul, Ishbosheth, had the chief of staff, Abner ben Ner, and he had a confrontation with Abner, accusing Abner of having slept with one of King Saul's concubines. The deceased King Saul had left behind concubines. One was named Ritzpah, and Ishbosheth accused Avner of sleeping with Ritzpah, and Avner just blew up. And we don't know, by the way, whether Avner did or did not. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it. But he blew up. He said, "You dare accuse me of anything? I'm the one who is supporting your kingdom. Without me, David is king right now. I'm the one maintaining a fighting force to protect you. And I've had it. I'm out of here." And Avner went over to David. And David was so moved that David named Avner his new chief of staff. And as Avner was leaving, he encountered Yoav, who was being replaced, and Yoav assassinated him. And then David had to go through a fast and a whole kind of mourning, public mourning, to convey to the nation that he had nothing to do with it. It wasn't his plot to kill Avner, to sucker him in to coming and getting named so that on the way back he'd be executed. But Benjaminites included some who never forgave David and always suspected, right? What happened with John F. Kennedy? To this day, there are still theories, all the conspiracy theories about John F. Kennedy. You even have the Heilige Candace Owens, who even wants to say that it was the the Mossad. All these crazy people, really, really crazy conspiracy theorists. And so that was a conspiracy theory, that David was behind that. And then Ishbosheth, after Avner was assassinated, it became clear no one can sustain him anymore. And two guys within his inner circle assassinated him in his bed. Remember? Then they came to David, took credit for it, expected promotions. Instead, David executed both. How dare you lay your fingers on the anointed of God? And the conspiracy theorists in Benjamin blamed David for the assassination. And you've got a son. Amnon was killed, more blood. And Uriah the Hittite, the husband of Bathsheba, who was sent to the front and died to make everything nice and clean for David, he thought. Also, so you got all these people dying and conspiracy theories that David is involved with it. So he's Ish Hadamim. Shimi ben Gera says, "You're the man of blood." And that's what the text means when it says, Mikhalel, that he cursed him. Because nobody talked the way they talk nowadays. And which is which is a more horrible way to be cursed in public. To just have somebody yelling a four-letter word that gets heard 95 times in every sentence on a podcast, or to have someone calling a man that nobody would ever speak against an ish hadamim. Imagine somebody saying that in Trump's inner circle at a press conference. Guy's not, it's the United States, and Trump is not going to, but he's certainly going to fire the guy right away. Take a lot less than that. So he's cursing him, and he's calling him an ish b'liyal, a man of no values. And that clearly is a reference to the story of Bathsheba, which we've learned up, down, and all around. So we've learned it quite thoroughly. But and we learned that technically, there was no sin at all. And we can't go through that again now. But he's saying that. So that's Shimi ben Gera. And he's just not stopping. And he's throwing rocks. And that's dangerous too. And he's yelling, Heshiv alech Hashem, kol demei beit Shaul asher malachta tachtav. God is paying you back for all the blood from the house of Saul, whose throne you seized. You have no right. God is handing over the throne to your son Avshalom. Ten Hashem tamlucha yad Avshalom b'necha. You are in trouble because you're a criminal. You are encountering this tragic evil because you are a man loaded with blood, just overwhelmed with blood. And this is just too much for the Tzruya brothers. You've got Yoav ben Tzruya, the chief of staff, and Avishai ben Tzruya, Yoav's brother, who's like assistant chief of staff, vice chief of staff. And Avishai's system to the king, Lama yakalel hakelev hamet hazeh. Why should we allow this dead dog to speak this way to you? At Adoni HaMelech, to my lord the king. Ibrana va'asira et rosho. May I have your permission to cross over the road and cut off his head? In other words, not only to kill him, but basically cut off his head, because that's where his tongue is. And it's not unusual in those days, every so often, to cut off a head to prove that a person was dead. Nowadays, if someone gets killed in battle, they take a photograph, they get fingerprints, they send it across. There's plenty of proof. In those days, they would cut off a head in order to prove the guy was dead. So, and that's an expression I've shown you before. There was a place where King Saul was trying to kill David, pursuing David. David was hiding, and then Saul fell asleep at night in the middle of the night, and David and his men went. He had 3 men. They tiptoed into the camp of Saul, and they took his sword, and they took his water flask, and then they woke him up from the other side. Look how close we got. And David said to Saul, "And why are you trying to kill me? I'm just a kelev mate." That was an expression in those days. I'm just a dead dog. So we see from several references with that terminology in Tanakh, that was a term of art that was referring to somebody who is basically a nothing, worth nothing. David saying that about himself. He of course was consequential beyond words, but he was saying to Saul, I've got no worth. Why pursue me? And here Avishai is saying, let me kill this worthless lout, and let me cut off his head. Vayomer Melech Mali Pelachem B'nei Tzruya. And David says, you know something? You brothers of you children of Tzruya, you brothers Yoav and Avshal and Avishai, you're different from me. I don't have an issue right now. I deserve it. I have sinned in my life. I sinned in the way I did Bathsheba and Uriah. I understood I was following the letter of the law, and I was. But Natan HaNavi came and explained to me that I had sinned in the eyes of God so severely that my household would be cursed with bloodshed for the rest of time. So this is God's punishment. The Navi told me it would happen. It's happening. I accept it. This again is part of why David, who occasionally acted imperfectly, as we all do, nevertheless is deemed such a tzaddik, so righteous, and the progenitor of Mashiach. He comes from very modest roots, Moabite woman, also stems from the incident of Lot and his daughters in the cave, and he did misdeeds. He accepted God's punishment. He never just cursed and said this isn't fair. He accepted it. Ko yakalel ki Hashem amar lo kalel David. Leave him alone. Let him curse me, because clearly God has told him, maybe not explicitly, but placed in his mind, the idea to go and curse me. Umi Omar madua sita kain. So who's to say to him, why are you cursing me? It's a punishment. God is going to punish me. If it is not Shimi ben Gera, and you go across and you cut off his head, some other guy will follow up and will continue the cursing. Let me allow my ego and sense of self to go down a few notches in my lifetime. Maybe I need a little bit more humility, and maybe God needs to humiliate me so I have more humility, so that I can be worthy of a place in the world to come. So leave him alone. Vayomer David el Avishai v'kol avadav, hinei b'ni asher yatzami me'ai mevakeshet nafshi. So David said to Avishai and all of his servants, all of David's servants, look, let's focus on priorities here. My son, who came out of my loins, is busy trying to kill me. So let's forget about this other guy. Va'af ki ata with an ayin, ben hayamini hanichu lo v'kalel. So let this son of Ben Yamini is like Benjamin, Benjamin, Ben Yamini, Ben Hayamini, Binyamini. So let this Benjaminite, just leave him alone, let him curse me, ki omar lo Hashem, because I'm absolutely certain that God wants him to curse me. And this is a punishment. It's like when we ask God on Yom Kippur, please may we be forgiven our sins. And we list all the sins, al chet shechatanu, ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibarnu, dofi, and we ask God, please forgive us our sins. And then after the vidui of ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, and al chet shechatanu, we recite 2 or 3 more paragraphs where we ask that may we be forgiven the sins, and not through punishments. And if punishments there be, please let them not be horrible punishments. Because we know that for the sins we have done, in order to be rewarded in a place in the world to come, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a cleansing of the soul. And really, it's an orthodox concept that one is better off being punished in this world than in the world to come. If punishment has to be executed for sins that were done and moments of loss and tragedy, and again, you ask of God, please can the punishments be mitigated? But if there have to be punishments, better it be in this world than the world to come, and that there be less. And on the flip side, that's part of our theology, is that when we look at bad guys and we see, let's say, mafia leaders or other kinds of bad guys political Jew haters who seem to live peaceful lives into their 80s or 90s, and you say the guy was so evil. How could he live so long? How could he seemingly live a good life? And the theology that this is just theology of Judaism 101, is that we say, number one, you don't know what's going on in this guy's life behind closed doors. You just know what you see in public, right? We had a rare glimpse a few weeks ago of Macron of France, his wife slapping him in the face. You never see that. You just never see that. It was an accident. She slapped his face. They opened the door of the airplane a second too soon. So she didn't know the door was going to be open that second. So the whole world got an insight, a rare insight, that his wife slaps him in the face. Who knows how often she slaps him in the face? Who knows what kind of marriage he has? So who knows what punishment he goes through? We don't know what punishments people go through. Most people have different, well, not most people, people who get sick and have certain kinds of physical pain. We don't know what they're going through. They hide it. It's behind closed doors. But we don't know what they go through. And with their families, we don't know what kind of heartbreak they go through. And at work with their employers and their coworkers and all kinds of things. We had a brief insight. I didn't watch much, two or three episodes on one of the reality TV stations years and years ago. They had an insider's look at the Teflon Don. I forgot his name. The mafia guy, and you got to see him, his wife, and his son. His name will come to mind, and it was a reality show, and you got to see his son, the mouth on that boy, and the way the boy, I mean, nobody would talk to the Teflon Don that way. Gotti, thank you, Beth. Inside to be, it was titled something like "To Be a Gotti," and no one in the Gotti family would talk to him like that, or they would get whacked. But his son, he's not going to get whacked, and he talks to his father like that and to his mother like that. So first of all, you don't know what they're going through in their own lives. They look like they're happy, successful, and Gotti ended up in jail the rest. He actually ended up spending last years of his life. I'm spending the years of my life, after having had a severe illness, teaching Torah to some of the largest congregational gatherings in my entire career. This is a great time in my life. And imagine you spend a life learning Torah, and as you get older, and you're reaching a twilight of some sort, and you're at the peak of your game. Okay? So who knows who's happy? And these people seem so happy. And they wear silk suits, and they eat fancy, and they got 10 people behind them, and then they get whacked, like in Goodfellas or any of these things. It's not just fiction. It's obviously based on what goes on. And then the other part of the theology is a part of the theology that says, "Nu, and let the evil man have a peaceful life. Save up all of his punishment for the world to come. Let him get it all then." So there's two sides to it. That's part of theology, Orthodox theology. When people encounter bad things, it's like actually a comment to make. I don't know if you're in this circle or not, the people you hang around, but it's like a common thing. Like you're walking out the door and someone accidentally closes the door on your finger or on your foot. The first words out of your mouth, out of a normal non-Jew's mouth, is a 4-letter word. Out of a Ben Torah or a Bas Torah, someone who lives a Torah, first word is a kaparah. It's a kaparah. It's a little small punishment from God towards the punishments that he intends to dish out so I can have a clean, pure soul when my time comes. So it's an atonement. And when anything bad happens, come home from work. How was work today? It was one full 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours of kaparah, of atonement. And that's how we look at it. So that's how David HaMelech is looking at it. the cursing that I'm being subjected to, the shaming and the embarrassment, it's a kaparah. God is helping me atone. He sent Natan Navi. I've been given the word that there's got to be a cleansing. Let it be. And don't start up with Shimi ben Gera. But I will tell you as we wrap up, I will tell you, and I've told you before, but it might not have stuck at this time, that on his deathbed, he's going to say to his forthcoming successor, Solomon, he's going to say to Solomon, there are two people you've got to straighten out with that in my lifetime, it wasn't for me to do. One is Yoav, the Yoav who assassinated Avner, and in a few, maybe another week or two, we'll be reading about how Yoav assassinated Amasa, and we know Yoav killed Avshalom despite command not to hurt him. And you're going to have to straighten out with Shimi ben Gera, because he cursed me in public, and I couldn't do anything about it for religious reasons, practical reasons, but there's a final day of reckoning for him. And we'll learn more about that. But as we wrap it up now, I think that's the last puzzle for that. Let me just think. So perhaps God, first of all, perhaps God will look upon my punishment, namely the punishment he is dishing on to me. Ulai, let me just wait for that little black box out of the way. Okay. Ulai yira Hashem be'eni or ba'avoni. Maybe God will see in that sin, Heshiv Hashem li tova, that God actually has done me a goodness. Tachat kilulato yomazeh, because of what this guy has done to me. So David and his men continued on their way, while Shimi walked alongside on the slope of the hill, insulting him as he walked and throwing stones at him and flinging dirt. The king and all who accompanied him arrived at their destination exhausted and rested there. And the whole way through, V'shimi holech b'tzela hahar liumato haloch v'kalel v'yasakel ba'avanim leumato v'ipar be'afar. As we do close now, I just want to show you like 20 seconds of what this looks like. You know, we don't see it really. We don't see this in America or regularly. But I want to show you a little clip, 15 seconds, of Arabs throwing stones at a Jew. Every so often there's a story in the news because the leftist media report every possible story to make Jews in Israel look bad, and they cover up and they black out every story that gives context and shows the truth. They black out everything. It's unbelievable. Every case of an Arab who attacks and even kills a Jew in Judea, Samaria, blacked out. No one even knows it. You just hear about the following day when the Jews go back and get the Arab. So this is a story you'll never read about. It was a few years ago. That's where I found it. And just want to show you 15 seconds what it looks like. A minute. Here we go.
هتولع
Now imagine, first of all, you could see from the two army green shirts that those were soldiers. And imagine if clearly under those circumstances, the soldiers felt the right thing to do is to run away. But imagine if instead the soldiers had pulled out pistols or rifles and started shooting at them. So the next day, the New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the whole world would be talking about Israeli soldiers killing innocent Arab civilians. And they'd have all these quotes from the parents of the shot dead Arabs who were throwing rocks, talking about their sons, and this was going to go to college, and this one was in medical school, and this one was going to save lives, and this one was a pacifist, and this one wrote songs and poems, and the Israeli soldiers end up getting arrested. And then 6 months later, after being held in prison for 6 months without the right to talk to an attorney or without being even indicted and given a reason, there's an investigation and they're found innocent and they're released. And no one ever publishes a correction or an update in the media that the guys who had been arrested 6 months ago for shooting a bunch of Arabs were found innocent of all charges. And on top of it, no one would believe that the investigation was fair, because the media would say that the investigation was conducted by the Israeli Defense Forces rather than, and it would suggest that maybe it's a fixed investigation. But that's what goes on with that. And that's also what it looks like when people throw rocks. It sounds like nothing is throwing rocks. They could kill people that way, and they do. I look forward to seeing everybody. We have Thursday night will be, God willing, the class on honeypot. We'll continue with the halacha. We really started getting into the halacha and everything. And I'm so grateful you're here with us tonight. Bye-bye.